I was holding the envelope like it weighed 50 pounds. My hands, once steady enough to wire buildings and manage entire city departments, trembled slightly as I slit the top open. The paper inside was stark. One line in bold: "Your pension benefits have been suspended indefinitely pending review." There was no apology. No explanation. Just a phone number that rang forever, a generic government seal, and a signature I didn't recognize. I didn't speak. I didn't throw anything. I just stared. Outside, my neighbor's grandkids were drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, giggling. Their laughter clashed with the silence in my living room, a room I had planned to spend the rest of my quiet years in. A room built with 34 years of city service, 18-hour workdays, and promises made by men in suits who had long since retired to gated golf communities. I was a facilities supervisor for the city, one of those invisible jobs that only get noticed when something breaks. I kept the lights on in public schools, made sure the water didn't freeze in municipal offices, answered calls at 2 a.m. when a boiler burst or a pipe cracked in the old courthouse. I did it without fuss, without complaint. And I retired with the gold watch and the handshake, believing the system would keep its end of the deal. But now, my pension, the one thing standing between me and destitution, was gone. Just like that. 2 days later, I saw his face. I was walking past a laundromat with the old TV buzzing in the window. A young man in a crisp navy suit, sleeves rolled up like he'd ever touched a tool in his life, grinned as he pointed to a pie chart behind him. "Government efficiency means hard choices," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Cutting outdated pension liabilities is just step one." My stomach turned. Senator Caleb Morton. Freshly elected. Harvard trained. Smile polished to a sheen. And apparently, the architect behind a budget bill that had pulled the rug out from under thousands of retirees like me. He looked into the camera and smiled, as he talked about eliminating unsustainable burdens. I went home and pulled out my wife's old recipe box. Not for food. For what was taped to the bottom. A copy of my final pension agreement. A faded city directory with names I hadn't spoken in years. And a password written on the back of a stained recipe card, the login to the public records portal I'd helped design before I retired. The portal was still online. The access still worked. And I still remembered exactly how the city's budget system had been built, and where it liked to hide its secrets. The smile on that young senator's face. The one he wore while taking food out of my fridge. That smile was going to disappear. I didn't need a protest. I didn't need a megaphone. I just needed time. A quiet room. And a few connections who still owed me favors. By the time I was done, he wouldn't just lose votes. He'd lose everything he thought he was entitled to. Because if they were going to take what I'd earned in silence, then it was only fair I returned the favor. Silently. And thoroughly. I joined the city's facilities department when I was 23, back when my knees still worked and optimism hadn't yet been chipped away by overtime slips and fluorescent lights. My first assignment was patching a ceiling leak in the East District Library, a building older than my father. They handed me a rusted wrench and a laminated badge with my name misspelled. I didn't correct them. I just got to work. Over the next 3 decades, I learned to fix things nobody else would touch: boiler rooms with standing water and rat nests, cooling towers that hadn't seen maintenance since the Carter administration. I never complained. Not when the heat failed at the Children's Hospital on Christmas Eve, not when a burst pipe flooded City Hall in the middle of a mayoral election. I worked quietly, stayed late, and came in early. They called me Reliable Ray, a nickname that stuck so long it outlived the supervisors who gave it to me. My wife, June, used to say I was born with a wrench in one hand and guilt in the other. She wasn't wrong. I grew up in a house where men fixed things, emotions included. If something was broken, you didn't cry about it. You patched it up and moved on. That's how I handled our marriage. Our bills. Her cancer. When June got sick, I took night shifts so I could be with her during the day. I learned the schedule of her chemo appointments like they were building inspections. I kept track of her medications, her side effects, her favorite foods when she could still keep them down. I built her a reclining bed from scratch when the hospital one made her back ache. I even redid the bathroom so she could bathe without help, a project I finished at 3 a.m., the night before her final round of treatment. She passed away in the spring, just after the dogwood bloomed. I remember because she asked to see the blossoms one last time. I wheeled her out onto the porch in her blanket and sat with her until the sky turned pink and the air grew cold. She didn't say much. Just reached for my hand. After that, I stayed in the house. Alone. Kept working until the day came when HR called me in and handed me the retirement packet. "You've earned it," they said. "Go enjoy your golden years." And for a time, I tried. I took up woodworking again, finished restoring June's old garden bench, volunteered at the local community center when the lights would flicker. Nothing dramatic. Just the life of a quiet man who'd already done his share. The pension wasn't generous, but it was enough. Enough to pay the bills, keep the fridge stocked, send a small monthly check to my grandson in college. I wasn't asking for luxuries. Just dignity. And for a few months, I had it. Until Senator Morton smiled into a camera and called men like me unsustainable. Until I checked my account and saw that the deposit I depended on for groceries and gas and heat was simply missing. Until the system I had maintained and believed in, a system I had given my youth, my sweat, and my wife's final days to, decided I was nothing but a number in the red. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a liability. But I knew the system better than he ever would. And the thing about systems? If you build them right, you know exactly where the cracks are. It wasn't just that the pension was cancelled. It was how it was done. No letter from my old department. No call from the benefits office. Just a vague email from an unmonitored address and a frozen portal page where my monthly statement used to be. The phone number listed led to an automated maze that ended in silence. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I dug through old paperwork, pulled out my retirement agreement, cross-referenced it with city ordinances, even called Don, a buddy from my department who retired a year before I did. He hadn't been affected, yet. He sounded shaken. "Ray, this ain't right. We signed the same contracts." That was when I started digging. The city council's budget meeting had been live-streamed 3 weeks before. Buried in the archive was a 4-minute segment where Senator Caleb Morton, the golden boy of the state's new fiscal initiative, presented what he called a pension restructuring framework. It was dry, technical, full of phrases like legacy obligations and actuarial shortfall. But the subtext was clear. They were clawing back pensions from city employees, retirees, janitors, school nurses, anyone who didn't have a legal team. "We can't continue subsidizing outdated compensation models," Caleb said smoothly. "It's time to move forward." I knew the look in his eyes. Not arrogance, worse. Indifference. He didn't see us as people. We were numbers. Burdens. Obstructions to his next campaign commercial. Then came the final blow. During an interview on a local radio show, Caleb laughed, actually laughed, when the host asked about backlash from retired employees. "Most of them won't even notice," he said. "They're not online. Half don't even know how to read a PDF." The host chuckled uncomfortably. Caleb doubled down. "We're not trying to hurt anyone. We're simply cleaning house. If a few people feel slighted, that's unfortunate, but expected. Change always has casualties." Casualties. That was what we were now. Not workers who had stayed through blizzards and budget freezes. Not men and women who kept schools heated, fire trucks fueled, water lines flowing. We were just collateral. I stared at the screen, my tea going cold in my hands. I rewound the audio, needing to hear it again, not because I doubted it, but because some part of me needed to remember exactly how he said it. Smooth. Smug. Secure in his distance from the mess he'd created. That night, I took out my late wife's old laptop, the one we'd used to track her treatment expenses. It was slow, but reliable. Like me. I logged into the city's financial system. My admin credentials were long expired, but the public records interface, the one I'd helped beta test, still granted deep visibility for transparency. Funny how politicians always forget how much a janitor or an engineer sees when they're not looking. The pension fund wasn't just being trimmed. It had been gutted, and redirected. Into infrastructure bonds for companies I'd never heard of. Into contracts issued under emergency funding clauses with no bidding process. Into community outreach grants, awarded to nonprofits run by Caleb Morton's former campaign staff. I started cross-referencing. City funds. State funds. Re-election PACs. Donor databases. And then I saw it. A $1.2 million grant funneled through a green development shell company registered in Delaware. The address? A P.O. box tied to Morton's chief of staff. My heart was pounding. I clicked through filing after filing, reading between the lines like I used to read blueprints. Hidden in plain sight, a system of siphons and loops designed to look legitimate, but built to feed political careers. And my pension? It had paid for part of it. They took my life's work and used it to buy billboards and consultants. To shake hands and smile into cameras. To campaign. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just kept printing. By morning, my kitchen table was covered in paper. Not theories. Evidence. And in the middle of it all, his face smiled up at me from a glossy flyer, Senator Caleb Morton, securing our future. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the flyer, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a manila envelope with a single post-it note, "Start here." I addressed it to someone I hadn't spoken to in 10 years, a reporter named Maggie Flynn. The last time I saw her, she was covering a water main collapse. I remembered her as sharp, relentless, and dangerous to the people who underestimated her. And now, she was exactly who I needed. I sealed the envelope. The system had betrayed me. Now, it was my turn. The envelope sat on the edge of the table for 2 days before I mailed it. I'd written Maggie Flynn's address by hand, my handwriting shaky, uneven. She was now with the Capitol Ledger, covering city corruption and campaign finance. I'd followed her career in silence, always admiring how she never stopped digging. But something about sending that packet made the air feel thinner, like I was stepping off a ledge with no guarantee there was ground beneath. I told myself it was hesitation. But the truth? It was grief. You don't serve 34 years under the same system, raise a family on the promises it gave you, lose your wife while still believing in it, and then just let it go. There's a strange ache that comes when betrayal wears a polite face. Not rage. Not even bitterness. Just emptiness. The kind that settles into your chest and stays there. I walked the neighborhood a lot those days. Same streets I used to plow when winter dumped 2 feet of snow overnight. Back then, neighbors would bring me coffee in thermoses, wave from porches, shout thanks over the roar of the machines. I was someone. Now I was just the quiet old man with the limp, carrying a manila envelope like it held his soul. I passed by the city library one afternoon and saw the new, proudly renovated with state efficiency funds, banner stretched across the columns. Efficiency. That word had begun to curdle inside me. They used it like a scalpel, carving out livelihoods, dignity, memory, and calling it progress. I sat on a bench and watched people pass. A young father helped his daughter tie her shoes. 2 teenagers argued over music in shared earbuds. A busker tuned his guitar near the corner. Life carried on. But not mine. I had no wife to cook for. No work orders to fulfill. No pension checks to open. Everything I had built was gone or in someone else's name. Even my house, paid off after decades, felt like a relic. Each creak in the floorboards echoed louder now. Each photo of June stared back with more silence than comfort. The loneliness didn't scream. It whispered. One morning, I brewed coffee and stared at my bank balance. After 2 months of no pension deposits, the reality had set in. My savings were finite. My bills weren't. I'd canceled cable. Sold June's old Buick. Stopped buying the good coffee. Still, I was sliding. I opened a drawer and took out the budget journal June and I had kept since our first apartment. She'd written in tiny, hopeful script, always adding smiley faces next to grocery lists and underlining every time we saved $5 on eggs or detergent. It hit me harder than any cancellation notice. She trusted that we'd be okay. That if we worked hard, kept our heads down, followed the rules, the world would treat us fairly. She died believing that. And now here I was, cutting back on fruit and milk, while a 34-year-old senator smiled on magazine covers and called me a legacy issue. I sat in the quiet until the coffee went cold. That night, I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat with the dusk, letting the dark do what it does, erase the details. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to her photo. I just let the silence spread. I think it was the first time in my life I felt truly old. Not tired. Not sore. Old. As in, forgotten. Replaced. Irrelevant. And in that quiet, something gave way inside me, not like a dam breaking. More like a gear slipping out of place, quietly, permanently. This wasn't going to fix itself. Nobody was coming. The system I had served had already moved on. But there was still that envelope. Still that story waiting to be told. Still that voice I hadn't used in years. And though I wasn't ready to fight, I was done waiting. It was raining the morning I walked to the post office. A quiet, steady drizzle, the kind of rain that seeps into your clothes and your thoughts. I could have driven, but I didn't want to. I wanted to feel it. Every drop. Every step. Like a kind of baptism. Like I was walking out of one life and into another. The manila envelope was in my jacket, protected by a plastic sleeve June used to keep her recipes dry when she cooked near the sink. That felt appropriate. June always believed in preserving the important things. Inside the envelope was everything I'd spent the last month compiling. Copies of the diverted pension statements, the fake grant routing numbers, the contractor award spreadsheets showing Caleb Morton's campaign team listed as consultants. Paper trails, shell companies, contradictory filings, time-stamped screenshots. I didn't embellish anything. Didn't include a letter or plea. Just facts. The kind of facts that would burn if lit correctly. I arrived just as the post office opened. The clerk didn't make small talk. Just weighed the envelope, printed the label, and asked if I needed tracking. No, I said quietly. She'll know what it is when she sees it. And with that, it was done. I stepped back outside into the rain. I didn't feel better. This wasn't catharsis. But there was a new quiet inside me, not the empty kind. The settled kind. The kind of quiet that comes after you've accepted something you can't undo, and made peace with the consequences. For the next week, I didn't check the news. I didn't refresh any feeds. I went about my days the way June would've, tidy, simple, disciplined. I swept the front porch. Fixed the loose hinge on the gate. Took the bus to the market instead of driving. It felt strange at first, living so small. But it was honest. There was a kind of power in it. I wasn't hoping anymore. I was watching. And then, one morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, typed on a white envelope. Inside, a folded sheet of printer paper. Got it. Confirmed. Working. No signature. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. A small sentence, but it hit like a bell inside my chest. Maggie had received the packet. She had checked it. And she had believed it. It was strange, how calm I was. You'd think I'd be pacing, excited, waiting for the fireworks. But instead I poured a cup of tea, sat on the back steps, and watched the rain roll off the garden fence. Everything felt exactly as it should. Because I knew this wasn't going to be a story that came out in a day. Maggie Flynn wasn't a gossip columnist. She didn't publish rumors. She built cases. She investigated. And when she dropped a story, it hit like a hammer. That's what I was waiting for now. Not a moment. A movement. And when it came, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd just have to listen. I didn't tell a soul. Not Don. Not my neighbor Frank. Not even the clerk at the market who always asked if I was staying dry out there. The envelope had been sent. The work was out of my hands. But I wasn't idle. I spent my mornings walking, not for exercise, but for observation. The city looked different now. Same cracked sidewalks and overflowing gutters I'd once reported on like clockwork. But now, I noticed where the money wasn't going. What had been restructured? What had been left behind in the name of fiscal reform? The potholes were deeper in the low-income wards. The public parks that used to host senior yoga were fenced off for maintenance. New LED signs blinked out campaign slogans while the public buses ran on cut schedules. I took photos. I printed them. I labeled them with dates and locations. Not for the press. For me. To keep a record. To remind myself that this was never just about my pension. It was about erasure, of service, of memory, of the people who kept this city running while others took credit. A week passed. Then 2. I kept waiting to feel like I was doing more. But that's the thing about quiet revenge, it doesn't feel like revenge at all, until it hits. It was a Thursday when I first noticed the change. I was in the downtown cafe, same one I used to eat at during my lunch breaks, sipping my weak coffee when I overheard 2 city workers at the next table whispering over a newspaper. You see this story in the ledger? One slid the paper over. Something about campaign funds and public grants. My ears perked, but I didn't look. Not yet. I waited until they left. Then, casually, I picked up the paper they'd left behind. Page A3. A small headline. Senator Morton linked to questionable development grants. No photos. No bold font. Just a few paragraphs citing anonymous whistleblower documents and unusual routing of public money through non-competitive vendors. But I recognized Maggie's byline. This was her first shot. She was laying the foundation. And true to her form, it was watertight. No drama. Just facts. Quietly planted, like a fuse with a long wick. I folded the paper and slid it into my jacket. The article didn't mention pensions. Didn't mention me. But it was exactly what I'd hoped for. Maggie wasn't just going to expose a scandal. She was going to peel it, layer by layer, while the man at the center kept smiling for cameras, never realizing the floorboards were rotting beneath him. Over the next 10 days, 3 more articles appeared. Each more precise. One about no-bid contracts issued through a clean energy initiative. One about campaign staffers rebranded as consultants. One about public outreach programs that never actually held events. Still no mention of me. Still no drama. But I started seeing signs, tiny shifts. Caleb Morton stopped tweeting for 5 straight days. His campaign email list went suspiciously quiet. A scheduled town hall was suddenly postponed due to illness. And the real clue? The governor's office released a statement expressing full confidence in ongoing investigations into municipal grant disbursements. They didn't mention him by name. But they didn't have to. The silence was deafening. I walked past the local campaign headquarters one morning, the glass doors locked, lights off. A paper sign taped to the door, closed for reorganization. I kept walking. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a funeral march for a career built on borrowed credibility. And behind all the headlines, all the polite statements, I knew what was happening behind closed doors. Donors were pulling out. Fundraisers were stalling. Staffers were updating resumes. The man who'd called us burdens was now radioactive. And me? I still lived in my small house. Still drank my weak coffee. Still walked my route. But now, when I passed a certain billboard with Caleb Morton's face on it, the one that once read, "Forward with Fiscal Responsibility," it had a new banner across it. Spray painted in red. "Where's our money?" I didn't do it. Didn't need to. Truth does its own graffiti. The first time I saw Senator Caleb Morton again, it wasn't in person, it was on a television in the appliance section of a store I couldn't afford to shop in. Muted. Subtitled. His eyes tired, his hair slightly undone. He was flanked by 2 aides who looked like they hadn't slept in days. I stood there pretending to admire a blender while I read the crawl at the bottom of the screen. Senator faces ethics inquiry over misuse of public grant funds. No breaking news alert. No music. Just another quiet unraveling, happening in the background of regular life. I turned and walked out of the store. By then, it wasn't just Maggie writing. The national outlets had picked up the scent. Emerging political star under investigation. Whistleblower documents expose misuse of city funds. Greenwashing or graft. But none of them knew what I knew. That this hadn't been a sudden discovery. This was architecture. Quietly laid brick by brick, until the weight of the truth made the whole thing collapse. Within weeks, the dominoes started to fall. First, a nonprofit director resigned, citing health reasons. Then, a former aide leaked emails. Then came the FOIA requests. I didn't read every article. I didn't need to. I could feel the tide changing, not in headlines, but in the way people spoke his name. Like they were tasting something bitter. The city council issued a statement distancing itself from the senator's external fiscal priorities. The mayor, once his strongest ally, made a speech about restoring transparency and rebuilding public trust. And still, not a word about me. I was never the story. That was the beauty of it. Because the truth didn't need a face. It just needed light. I heard from Don one afternoon. He called, voice low and tense. "You watching the news?" "Nope," I said. "They're talking about bringing back suspended pensions. Something about improper authorization. Think that means us?" "Could be," I said. He paused. "Did you?" he started to ask. But then he stopped himself. "Never mind. Just thought you'd want to know." "Thanks, Don. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to." The following week, a letter arrived. Official envelope. Government seal. This time, they got my name right. Inside, a statement of reinstated pension benefits, retroactive. Payment to be deposited within 5 business days. No apology. Just numbers. But I didn't need sorry. I needed justice. Quiet justice. The kind that restores without fanfare. A few days later, while walking home from the corner market, I saw a poster stapled to a street pole. Morton's face, slightly faded. Community Town Hall, postponed indefinitely. Below it, someone had scribbled in pen, "No trust left." I stood there for a long time, just reading those 3 words. No trust left. They had tried to erase us, our labor, our lives, our worth. And in doing so, they had erased themselves. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a warm mug in my hands and June's blanket over my knees. The air was cool, and the world was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. This one had weight. Like justice exhaling. I never planned to see him in person. Truthfully, I didn't think I'd need to. The headlines had done enough. The frozen smiles. The cancelled appearances. The investigation with its quiet, relentless pace. He was already shrinking from the public stage. But life has a way of circling back. It was late afternoon, and I was in the municipal building downtown, the same place I used to report maintenance issues, the same lobby where I once fixed a broken automatic door in the middle of a blizzard. I was there to sign some updated pension paperwork. Ironically, in the same office I'd visited 34 years earlier to fill out my first employment form. That's when I saw him. Caleb Morton. Standing alone near the elevators. No entourage. No cameras. Just a man in a tailored coat, staring at his phone like it might rewrite the future for him. He didn't see me at first. I almost walked past. But something in me said no, not out of anger, not out of pride. Out of closure. I stepped beside him, slow and steady. He glanced up, saw me, and there was that flicker, the awkward recognition that comes when someone can't quite place your face, but senses it matters. "Ray Harmon," I said softly. His brow furrowed. "I worked 34 years for this city," I continued. "Retired the year your budget bill stripped my pension." His face changed. Not shame. Not fear. Just exhaustion. "Mr. Harmon," he said carefully, I'm sorry if you were affected. We had to make some very difficult. Don't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. But the word landed like a nail. You made a decision that hurt people you didn't know. People who built the pipes and patched the walls and stayed late when no one else did. You did it with a smile and a slogan. And then you redirected the money. I didn't. You did, I said. And I found it. He blinked. You what? I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Because deep down, he already knew. He knew someone had unraveled it. And the look in my eyes told him it was me. All of it. The envelope. The documents. The whisper into the right hands. I watched his throat work to swallow something too big. "Why didn't you come forward?" he asked finally. "Why not go on camera? Make a name for yourself?" "Because I didn't need a name," I said. "I needed you to stop." We stood in silence for a moment. The elevator chimed behind him. He didn't move. "They're going to bury me," he said, more to himself than to me. "Not bury you," I replied. "Just, remember who you really are." He looked at me, really looked, for the first time. Like he saw the long hours. The missed anniversaries. The nights spent in boiler rooms while men like him gave speeches in climate-controlled halls. "I didn't mean," he began. "But you did," I interrupted. "You meant every word. You called us unsustainable. You laughed. You believed we'd fade quietly. And some of us might have, if we weren't paying attention." The elevator chimed again. Still, he didn't move. "Tell me what happens next," he said finally, voice small. I shrugged. "That depends. On how much truth you're willing to face." He nodded slowly, as if expecting something louder, harsher. "But I wasn't here to punish. That was already happening. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in that sterile hallway, a man surrounded by glass, with nowhere left to look but inward. I didn't check to see if he stepped onto the elevator. I just kept walking. Not with triumph. With peace. Because some battles don't need victory marches. Just exits. It took time. That's what people don't understand about healing. It's not a sunrise. It's the slow warming of a house after a long winter. A gentle thaw. A light in the hallway you forgot still worked. For weeks after the confrontation, I didn't talk about what happened. Not to Dawn. Not to the neighbors. Not even when the local news finally used the words whistleblower and whistleblower provided evidence in relation to the investigation. They never named me. Maggie never called. And I never needed her to. My pension came back. Full, retroactive, regular. A quiet deposit every month. No fanfare, no apology, just numbers. Just dignity. I kept my life small. Repaired the garden fence I'd let rot for too long. Donated June's old books to the local library. Took a bus to the coast one weekend just to feel the salt in the air. Walked slowly on the sand. Sat on a bench with her photo in my pocket. There was peace in the silence now, not emptiness. I signed up to teach a once-a-month workshop at the community center. Basic home repairs for seniors. 5 people came the first time. We fixed a leaky faucet. Nobody talked about politics. We just laughed when someone stripped a screw, passed around duct tape like it was currency. One of them asked what I did before retirement. City work, I said. Behind the scenes. Kept the place standing. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Because it did. I found an old record player at a yard sale and bought it on impulse. Cleaned it up, rewired it. Brought it home and played June's favorite Sam Cooke album. The scratch of the vinyl, the warmth of the sound, it filled the corners of the house in a way that made the silence feel like company. Some days, I still felt the ghost of what happened, the betrayal, the cold language, the smug smile on a screen. But it didn't own me anymore. It was a chapter. Not the whole book. I started walking farther. Let the coffee steep longer. Began writing things down again, not budgets or complaints, but memories. June's recipes. Funny things Dawn said. The way the city looked in the morning light. The world hadn't changed much. But I had. I'd remembered who I was beneath the uniform, beneath the pay stubs, beneath the name on the pension file. Not a burden. Not a number. A man. A builder. A keeper of things that mattered. And now, as the days grew warmer and the garden began to bloom again, I found myself humming as I trimmed back the rose bushes. Whistling as I stirred the pot on the stove. Not because everything had been fixed. But because I was still here. And I was no longer waiting to be rescued. I was home. They took what I built and tried to erase it, called it waste, called it legacy, called it a burden too heavy to carry forward. But I was never asking to be carried. I was asking to be remembered. And now, as I sit beneath the porch light June insisted we leave on 4 good souls coming home late, I realize I never needed their recognition, only their silence. Because the truth is standing. The pension is restored. The names will fade. But the house still stands. The hands that built it still remember. And somewhere in the quiet corners of this city, the ones who thought we were nothing more than line items now know, we keep records too. Not for vengeance. But for the dignity they thought we'd forgotten how to demand. I sip my coffee. The garden is blooming. And behind me, the radio plays Sam Cooke. Nothing flashy. Just the sound of something worth keeping. Like a promise. Kept.